Hi. Okay. Wow. I wasn't expecting y'all to actually pick up me. Thanks. Hope y'all are having a good day.
We are. It's great.
Yeah. I'm in a weird point in a whole bunch of things, but
What's
I
on your mind?
was watching last week's AXP, and then Talk Heathen, and I've been watching the channel for a bit now and periodically think on things, but I'm starting to have some particularly strong feels, and I'm trying to determine if I actually have religious trauma or if it's just like a secondhand trauma kind of thing, or if it's just certain memories being wrapped up in an other traumatic situation, because things are striking out, but I can't tell if it's like when I was relating hard to non-binary or neurodivergent things where it was like, oh, that explains a lot, or if it's just like how I can relate to lesbians' experiences, since I am a queer AFAB person who's been raised in a very heteronormative culture. So there's some overlap, but I'm not in that category.
Yeah, let me see if I can do anything to sort of demystify things here. And I want to be really careful about the elasticity of some of these words. And I know I may get some pushback on some of this, but I just want to express broadly that the term trauma is not something that we need to gatekeep. It's not something that we need to be overly concerned with in our application of it. Like, certainly, if I were to be hit in the head with a baseball bat and then go into an ER, we might describe that as a blunt force trauma. At the same time, if I were to, drop something on my toe and go, ooh, ow, that's smarts, and then keep on walking, that can still be described as trauma. When we're talking about our mental health and we're discussing trauma, I think we want to take the same approach. That's not to suggest that we can open up the DSM-5 and say that, well, you meet clinical levels of post-traumatic stress disorder, because that is a much more specific bar and a different way of describing things. But I would suggest broadly that if you exist in a religious society, that you have had some cuts and scrapes, maybe some psychological paper cuts that we can describe as psychological trauma, and I really don't want to be overly careful in guarding that word. Now, your trauma, is it religious in nature? Could it be described as religious trauma? Well, we don't even need to worry about what the DSM has to say about that, because the DSM doesn't address religious trauma specifically. This is a rather new concept. We're still developing research on this subject. There have been exploratory committees investigating whether or not religious trauma ought to be differentiated from other forms of trauma, and that's an ongoing discussion, and there's debate within the field, and perhaps we'll see future revisions that do differentiate between social traumas and chronic traumas and all of these different kinds of things. But none of that needs to have anything to do with you yourself, Katie. If you are struggling with identity acceptance because you live in a religious society that doesn't accept your identity, we can call that religious trauma, or we can just call it damn shit, ouch, that hurts. And that's what I would maybe encourage you to do. If something hurts, it's worth doing something about. And whatever that healing might look like, there are so many different avenues and options. But I just want to say, if you're in pain, you're allowed to do something about it, regardless of what we call it. How does that land for you?
I mean, you're going to make me cry, but yeah, that is an understanding of trauma that has taken me into my mid-30s to gain, just with life in general, and with various experiences and situations in my life throughout. I not really ever thought of myself as having didn't know the term religious trauma until watching AXP, but I hadn't thought of myself as potentially having it until today. wasn't raised to be religious, or if I was, it didn't take. But there was a period of time where I was required to go to church, despite knowing that I was not even slightly religious and wanted nothing to do with it. And it was kind of like being shoved in the closet.
Sure. I mean, that experience of having to alienate yourself, having to pretend to believe in something that you don't believe in, that separation and your sincerity.
Quietly wear a mask of letting people assume whatever they want because you know it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Actually, be honest.
That can be incredibly traumatizing. And whether we use the word incredible or mild or whatever else, we really don't need to weigh and measure and evaluate these things. There's no quota. Right? Like if you cut your finger, it doesn't matter if it's a tiny paper cut. If it hurts, you go, ow, that hurts. If it's bleeding, you get a Band-Aid. If the pain is sufficient that you need to go to an ER, that you need stitches, like address the pain on its own sake, on its own level. You really don't need to apologize or justify, oh, well, it shouldn't be that bad. If it hurts, and you're allowed to have compassion towards it. You're allowed to do something about it.
Yeah.
Oh, I can hear what you're feeling in your.
Yeah, thank you. Sometimes words are difficult.
Yeah, sometimes yes, and he's right. If it's not just a flesh wound, it's not just a flesh wound. Was the joke that I would try and work in, because when things get heavy, I always try and find a joke for them. And it's been into the later years of my life, actually dealing with some of the things from childhood and younger that are deeply affecting. Luckily, on my end, it's less religious trauma and more other shit. But yeah, just know you're not alone.
Which sucks just as much.
Yeah, it does. It's also not just a flesh wound. But yeah,
not at all.
You should know whatever the label is, because I've had people talk to me and be like, oh, I think you're this or that or the other. And whatever label ends up applying to me under our current diagnostic schema, I know that this is me and I know what I feel. And I hope that you find that clarity for yourself as well. Mm-hmm. Whatever word or language you use to describe it.
The last thing I'll just kind of shoehorn in here, Katie, is that for many of us, for most of us, religious trauma can be sort of differentiated by the social component of it. The fact that it is coming from a belief system that is held by people around us, that our community participated in that trauma in a lot of ways, or negated or denied the significance of that trauma. Religious trauma just so often has this social component to it that can be incredibly invalidating. It's not just that I had this moral injury. It's not just that I was humiliated in front of my community. It's that so many people in my community stood there and said, yeah, you should feel ashamed. You should feel awful. And I would only ask that you not re-traumatize yourself by invalidating or diminishing your own pain. If it hurts, it hurts. You don't have to justify it. You don't have to be able to explain why it hurts. You don't have to be able to say, well, the car accident wasn't actually that bad. We have all heard stories of somebody who flies through the windshield of the car and hits the grass and rolls away without a scratch on them. And I know that if I stop at a stop sign too fast, I can get whiplash in my neck. The trauma is not about the fall, it's about the landing. And if it hurts, don't invalidate that hurt.
Yeah, no, all that very perfectly articulates what I was starting to feel. So, and then going into trauma specifically, sometimes life can predispose you to having that I can sleep when I'm dead kind of attitude, because that's the only rest you get.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that. Just to say, you don't have to change anything. You don't have to fix any of this, but you certainly can. So there's no quota, there's no rush, but if you're feeling distress, if you're feeling pain, please feel empowered to do something about that pain. We've mentioned some different resources already. I know that there will be resources available in the chat, but let me just say you're allowed to put effort into healing, into taking care of yourself, and a well-informed secular therapist, a religious trauma therapist can be a really powerful part of that. There are a number of great books, podcasts, resources. Don't feel like you have to fix this ever. Don't feel like you have to rush into fixing this today or tomorrow, but do know that you're going to change anyway. And so if you want to direct that change and grow towards healing, there are so many things to help you do that. And we certainly hope to see you feeling better and really appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing all of this with us this afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. And I mean, just being able to put a name on it, for me at least, does help.
Yeah, name it to tame it. It's cheesy but powerful.
Yeah, and I, not right this second, this is not that time, but yeah, just being able to put a name on it helps to have a path to deal with it, or at least a framework to look at it through when I'm thinking on it, when it resurfaces in my brain in whatever way.
Yeah, well, glad to hear it. Journeyfree.org is one last thing I want to make sure to throw out there. That's a website maintained by the person who actually coined the phrase religious trauma syndrome and has been a big part of that push. If you want to explore that idea more, that would be at least one place to start. Thank you so much for your call and for your openness and vulnerability with us, and we hope that you'll take good care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you both also very much, and all y'all keep up the good work.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you.